Welcome to Neuro Revolution. The world was not designed for us, so we are creating a new one. Hear the stories of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers. The rebel minds changing the world. Welcome to today's episode. I'm welcoming Michael Ruffin, who is the president of Dueling Minds, an AuDHD nonprofit, which we're going to learn about today, a peer supports facilitator for AuDHD people, and a content creator and advocate. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I would love just to start off by hearing about your personal story, your journey of discovering who you are as a neurodivergent person. So would you share a little bit about how you discovered or what your story is to understanding yourself as an AuDHD person?
Yeah, so I was late diagnosed. So kind of very common story, especially post-pandemic. Mine started pre-pandemic, though. So, um, going through life, struggling, not really knowing why I was struggling, had a lot of failures, or just a lot of things that just didn't go the way that I had planned them, or I wasn't able to follow through on things. I was struggling to maintain, work, financially struggling, all kinds of things. And, it kind of really came to a head where I just kind of had this really overwhelming experience that was like, okay, this is not normal. I don't know what's going on. And that led to researching kind of like what was happening and leading me to learning more about ADHD, because I always thought, like a lot of people, that it was just more of like an attention issue or someone being like really hyperactive and destructive. But what I found out was like, oh no, like it affects your emotions, it affects your perception of time, it affects your ability to do things. There's so many other things that it affects, and I'm like, okay, this sounds like my experience. So started doing that research. I joined like a peer support group on Facebook and started talking to other people, listening, and then going to therapy, and just it honestly became my special interest of learning about ADHD and then subsequently autism, because through my journey of that, I got diagnosed both ADHD, and then like 5-ish months later I got diagnosed autistic as well. Um, so it's
And that's relatively new, right? That they're even considering these things can go together.
Yeah, it's been since 2013, so just probably like 11 years now that they started dual diagnosing. So we're still very much in infancy of understanding the dual diagnosis, which is says something because we're still in a single lifetime's worth of understanding autism. Because the very first
Right.
person, yeah, the very first person diagnosed autistic in the United States passed away. I believe it was this year. So that's something, to realize too when it comes to autism, is like we're still understanding it quite a bit. And ADHD is another one. Like, even though we can trace back documentation of both ADHD and autism to like the 1800s and further back, of just people describing these things in people or themselves, as far as like actual study and understanding, we're still very much new to it.
And I didn't mean to
So,
cut you off from your story, but yeah,
oh no, you're
that's
fine.
it's a really interesting context to come into because a lot of folks are discovering that they're neurodivergent, particularly ADHD and autistic later in life, um, like both of ourselves. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, like, so this was more recent in the past few years. Was there anything else you want to say about that in your story? Because I have some other questions about that, like maybe how it influenced your worldview or your self-concept.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I got diagnosed 2020, so it's only been 4 years, officially
Yeah.
diagnosed, and I mean, it completely changed my perspective on everything. It completely changed my trajectory in life of what I'm doing and like what I'm passionate about. Um, Mental health has always been a big part of my life in one way or another, and um, I never really thought myself to pursue like a career path into mental health or anything like that, but uh it just kept popping up in my life. And then when this happened, I'm like, okay, through my own life experience and understanding and my ability to take these concepts and break them down to where people resonated with it, right? Like, because I started on TikTok just talking about my experience and sharing what I learned with people, and that was something that really pointed me in the direction that I'm going now, because I amassed 100,000 followers on TikTok very quickly. And I was like, okay, so this is something that people
Mhm.
need to know and understand. Um, and yeah, so I kind of became a peer sports specialist, started coaching, going through all of the, like just the different steps. I'm like, okay, like this is my path now. And I haven't looked back since. It's changed my life for the better. Having this new understanding of like how my brain works. I still have struggles for sure, because I don't really know anyone that doesn't struggle, even with all the awareness and understanding and tools and ideas, and you know like that helps a lot, and that's why I do what I do, because I know like people can learn and get better and feel better about themselves and work with their brain. But there's always that kind of like level of like, this is a thing that we have to deal with every day of our lives. And if you can't reach a level of acceptance, like that's very burdensome, you know? And I want to help people get to that point.
Hopefully this isn't breaking up too much. I might have weak internet at the moment, but um, thank you so much for sharing your journey and how it's really given you a new sense of like direction and purpose. And you mentioned something really key about how undiscovered neurodivergence can lead to taxing on your mental health. Because there's no you sense yourself struggling. You see it in different ways. Um, and I think that often those ways in which we struggle can be labeled as laziness, or you're just not trying hard enough. And so you try, you show up to it, and you keep trying harder, and it's still not, something's not connecting. And so I think that it's really powerful that you're talking about leaning into a sense of acceptance. And even I'm curious to hear even a little more about that too, because in some ways, to me, I see like that acceptance as like my neurotype works a certain way, my brain works a certain way, and if given the right supports, I can thrive more. But also, I'm still within an environment in a world that isn't designed for me, essentially. And so, like, there's still going to be this like meeting up against difficulties and things like that. So I'm curious, yeah, maybe like say a little bit more about acceptance and how you like help people come to that space of acceptance.
Yeah, I kind of lead into the concept of radical acceptance, because
Mhm.
um, you kind of have to, like
Yeah.
from my own experience. And like, um, you know, do we want to kind of exist in a constant state of overwhelm and dread and depression? Um, or can we lean into some acceptance and figure out, okay, like what can I can control, what can I do, how can I help myself, what are the things that I can, work with, and what are the things that I just um, will always inherently struggle with, and can I accept that? I know for me, like I'm always going to accept struggle with memory. My memory's not great. I forget a lot of things. You know, I get distracted. Am running a business and a nonprofit. Like that affects a lot of different things. So I know that some people are going to be okay with that and some people are not. And I have to accept that. I have to accept that there are going to be days where I will have all of the energy in the world to clean my entire house, and there are going to be days where I will be barely able to get out of bed. And like what radical acceptance is to me, it's not like a dismissal of the emotions we feel, but more of allowing ourselves to process them without shame or guilt. So it's like, yes, this is frustrating. Yes, this sucks. Yes, like, we can hate it. We can be angry about it, and that's okay. But we don't want to like reflect that back onto ourselves in a way that's going to make us feel bad about ourselves or shame ourselves or beat ourselves up or anything of that nature, because that is not productive, right? That is only going to continue that spiral. It's only going to prevent us from being able to move forward, which is like working through those emotions, being angry, being upset, and allowing yourself to feel those things. But then, you know, when you feel well enough to keep going, you know, and it's okay, like, if in those moments you're like, man, I can't do this, but it's like, how much belief are you putting into that? Because there are days like, man, this is overwhelming and I can't do this. Like, I just want to, like, clean my hands of everything and I want to quit because it's hard and it sucks and I don't like it. But I know, like, in my core that I'm never going to quit, you know? And that's kind of like how I cope with these things, because it's like, I don't want to lose. And I think that's a bit like running off of spite a little bit, which is fine. Like, using whatever emotions you can to like move forward, and just like, yeah, like I'm gonna do everything it takes to get where I want to be. But I also have to accept that how I get there is going to be different than most people, especially in our society that favors things that to move faster than I'm able to. So I'll get there, but it may not be as quickly as other people.
And that's a really beautiful bringing together of like um, creating more agency. So like when you have that radical self-acceptance, it sounds like, at least for you, that it leads to a sense of like tenacity. Like our wills keep showing up, even if it looks different. So there's that
Mhm.
element of like how much maybe in this moment is it the belief that I can't do it, and then how much of it is like really real, and not just say that it's never real. Like if you have that thought, that's real for you in that moment. And I love too that there it sounds like you probably practice a lot of like mindfulness or self or like presence, like staying with like what are my emotions, like moving through it, allowing. And I would love too for you to share maybe a little bit about like for you does it mean, or what helps you to move through emotions, because I know, like, especially for those of us with more sensitive nervous systems, it can be a lot to hold, like really intense emotions, and to, quote unquote, move that through, like whatever that means. So, what would you say are like things that really help you to do that?
Well, I think for one too, like my experience with emotions is a little bit different for some people too, because like I struggle with alexithymia. Um, so there are times where it can be confusing of like what I'm actually feeling. It can be like I don't even know what I'm feeling. or I don't even know like why I'm struggling so much, and like that leads to frustration and anger. And it's having to realize that like the frustration and anger, oftentimes for me is a secondary emotion, because it's like, oh, I'm frustrated about something else, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So yeah, I do have to do a lot more introspection and like understanding of my own experiences, and being like, okay, like why am I frustrated? Why am I angry? Like, what is going on that's affecting me in a way that I can't, for some reason, do this thing? Am I overwhelmed? Am I stressed? Am I, you know, going through a depressive episode? Am I, you know, do I need to like go outside because I've isolated myself for a little bit too long? Like, there are a lot of different factors as to why these things are happening, and it's like, yeah, so I have to do a lot of that. But as far as like working through the emotions, I talk to myself a lot. That really helps me. Like I'll actually, because I'm a verbal processor in a lot of ways, so I talk to myself. I verbally process the things that I'm going through. I'm like, okay, like this is what I'm feeling. This is how I'm feeling. Like these are things I can do. These are things that I'm struggling with. Hey, it's okay to like cut my to-do list down because that's what's making me overwhelmed. Like I'll talk to myself like that. Sometimes if I don't talk to myself, I'll write it out, because writing helps visualize my thoughts. Like it makes it tangible, so I can look at it and be like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Um, you know, and then I yeah, there's a lot of like the kind of like cliche answers that you'll hear in mental health, of like going for a walk, going outside, socializing, doing something fun. Like all those things are cliche for a reason, because they work. But we may be like resistant to doing those things because of how cliche they are, right? Or the concept of doing those things might be just difficult, right? Like, oh, it's easy for some people to get up and go to the gym. But for us, with our brains, like that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of energy. Um, and oftentimes the getting started part is the hardest part. So it's a lot of energy to process through everything. Um, and sometimes like that's all the energy you have. So I don't know, like it's a very complex kind of like scenario and like experience, but overall like it becomes easier because I used to use data points of like understanding like, oh, I felt this before, so I know how to take care of myself in this situation. And it gets to a point where it becomes a little bit more automated and not so um like intentional and thought of, because like we tend to have to think about our thinking, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that was a very long, complicated answer, because it's
Let's
for
go
our
for it.
brains it
Yeah.
can be a very complicated thing. But yeah, like there's just a lot of processing and a lot of effort to get to the point where you can be more in tune with your body, be more in tune with your emotions. And for us, that might look different than what you might hear for an holistic or neurotypical person, because we feel and experience things differently. So we have to adjust that to our experiences.
Yeah. And it I think it connects back to that sense of radical acceptance as well. That, that the cliche things may really be helpful, and to also radically accept that it may take a lot more energy,
Yep.
for the person who has to do that with AuDHD. And I also had my thoughts. Also, it also came to mind that these things as well, we can allow them to look differently, depending on what sort of energy we have. Like I really like there's a term for it, but it's like the fluctuating goals or something. Like you have your, if I have my highest energy, I could do this. If I have medium energy, this, or like really low energy, then there's this version of like the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that sense of that you mentioned around like going out, which really just has to do with connecting with someone else. And I've, had experiences where like maybe going out to an event was too much that day, but I could call like a close friend, so there's still a connection happening. Like it don't necessarily have to go out from the house, or if there's a lot of stimuli, or you're experiencing that, but you're finding a way that you're still connecting in with a thing that can support you at the level that you're able to. So making it accessible for yourself. Um, yeah, there's something else you mentioned, but I forgot.
You're
um,
fine. Yeah.
I did want to touch on now what you're doing with Dueling Minds, and I love that name because that's how it feels.
Yeah, that's exactly why we came to that name. Because there are a lot of resources out there for ADHD. There's a lot of resources out there for autism. There's not a lot of resources out there for the diagnosed experience. So like when you are dual diagnosed, it feels like your brain is dueling itself. Like, it kind of has that experience of like I have two brains and they don't like each other, and getting them to work together is a task, right? Like you have to mediate that. So when it comes to Dueling Minds as a whole, um, I think my ambition has kind of leaked into the nonprofit, and that's not a bad thing because I really want to do a lot of different things, and I'm working on a lot of different things. Um, it started out as a peer support group, so we have been running a peer support group for over a year now for ADHD. We have, last I check, around 1,800 people in the meetup group that we have. And we typically, every Sunday evening, will have around 40 to 50 people show up. So that's been really, really amazing. And we also send a newsletter out that kind of recaps the peer group with like the resources, the tips, the shared experiences that people provide, and so we share that out, and then it's all free. Um, and overall, we took that and we're like, okay, what else can we do, right? Like, we do want to host more peer support groups, so that's one thing that we want to start doing is finding people that can facilitate more groups for us. Um, Focus a little bit more on some of the intersectional experiences, so the LGBTQIA, Black and other people of color, and like because those are all really important experiences, and like someone that is LGBT is going to have a different experience with neurodiversity as someone who is white or someone who is black, or if someone is, LGBT and also black. Like those are all different overlying things, and there's a lot of different experiences that are very important to talk about. So like we want to expand into those areas. So the overall concept of that is building community. You know, building that community, building those connections, and helping people, um, you know, feel not alone. So that's a big focus. The next kind of focus is a twofold approach to helping people develop self sustainability. Um, the first part is actually going into different businesses and educating them, right? Like, we want to go to anyone that's willing to talk to us, and um, we'll educate the employees, we'll educate the managers, we'll do things to help them understand their employees on the that are neurodivergent, so we can help them thrive in those work environments. So, and maybe even offer, like consultation or coaching for their employees or whatever, right? Like we want to do a lot of different things there to help, people that are working jobs and trying not to burn out. Um, Second to that, the other approach is on the individual itself. So we want to help with making coaching more accessible. So doing right now, we're working on a group coaching program. So it's a lot more affordable. But we also want to get to a point where like individual coaching can also be a lot more affordable. Um, Also, we want to help develop more resources and programs to get people into industries that they want to go into, but maybe they struggle to go to college, right? Like I struggled in college. I never finished a college degree. I got some certifications and some other stuff, but I was never able to finish my degree in game design that I went for. You know, and so I'm working with right now in two different locations with the gaming industry. I'm trying to develop a weekend event that will provide resources and information about the gaming industry for people that are interested in it through the lens of neurodiversity. So like having professionals come in and talk and give perspective on like how to get into it, what it looks like, what you need to be able to succeed in that industry. And then I'm also working with some journalists to develop a mentorship program for journalism. Uh, so like those are the first two things that we're working on, but like I'm hoping to develop things in many different industries that are um, typically high neurodivergent populace. So like
That is
typically
a
art and stuff like that.
vast vision.
Yeah, it's a lot. We're working a lot of things, and you know, I want to be international. Like I want to connect with as many people and as many locations as possible. Um, and we're just getting started in that.
Well, I'm really excited for what you're creating. I mean, at least for the autistic community, I know of the statistic, right, of like somewhere between 60 or 80% are underemployed or unemployed. And so, like, a lot of what you're doing is really helping with that, as far as I can tell, right? So, like, that sense of both being in businesses, but then also helping the individual.
Yeah, because I mean I've struggled financially all my life, and that's not like I want to help that. Like we shouldn't have to struggle like that. Um, and yeah, like that kind of unemployment rate is I'm hoping to maybe put a dent in that, lower that a bit. Um, but that seems a bit ambitious, but I'm going to try at least.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, especially that piece around helping folks be financially sustained or sustainable is really important because it connects in with like when you're afraid, which financial insecurity can definitely, strike fear in your soul. um, that it impacts your whole nervous system, and then that makes a lot of the things of the different difficulties that you might be experiencing like harder. Memory issues, the sensory sensitivity, like all of this can be um, even more intense like when you're experiencing financial insecurity. And it's really awful that those things go together right now, that neurodivergent folks are not connected in with employment as that well. And then also, like you're saying, that it's just difficult even when you are like you have to go in and talk to businesses about how to actually make this more accessible because it's not something that's naturally occurring. um, so I really appreciate that you're doing that. I would love to hear too about your experience being someone who's creating a nonprofit. So in a sense, it's not the exact same as entrepreneurship, but in a way it is. So, like, this is it. Creating a nonprofit is not a small task. How have you been able to navigate this as a neurodivergent person?
Um, Very difficult. Like it's difficult. I always have this constant fear that I'm going to screw it up somehow, and everything's gonna crumble. Um, but I do have a good team. I think that's very, very important, especially doing this kind of endeavor. Is like I have a lot of people that are on board with what we're doing, and there are people that are able to do things that I'm not, which is great because I have this tendency to try to do everything myself, which is a very common experience for a lot of ADHD and autistic people. Is like we have that hyper independence because that's just been our life experience of being let down by the systems that were supposed to support us, but so we found a way. So learning to delegate more, that's been very paramount in this. I don't do that very well, but I do it better, you know, and working on it constantly. So yeah, it's finding the right people that want to help you with the vision that you have. And also just I think part of the radical acceptance is in conjunction with like radical compassion, radical grace, just like I'm working with other neurodivergent people, and I know people are going to forget things. I know people are going to um have low energy days. I know people that are going to be distracted, so I understand that. It doesn't make, and the thing is like this is kind of like that double-edged sword of like when you ask someone to do something and they forget, yeah, it's still frustrating, right? Like we still have to process that frustration, but that's part of the radical acceptance of like okay, we can be frustrated, but let's have a conversation like, okay, what can we do to help you remember, and developing those things to ensure people are, following through and making that effort. So I think a lot of it is to do is just like, working differently than everything I've ever learned growing up, because I've worked in like sales and I worked in different, environments that were very strict on things, that were not neurodivergent friendly. And so I want to like still be successful, but also leave that space open for those things, right? Like to be accommodating, and working with the team as best we can, so we can understand like, oh, these are the things that we need to succeed as a team. So yeah, like it's hard. It's not easy because there's a lot to keep track of. I hate administrative work. I absolutely hate it. So that's partly why I'm like, oh, am I forgetting something? Am I doing things wrong? And I don't have the money to hire people to do it for me yet. That's another thing. So there's all these moving parts and all these things, but it's doable. It just takes a little bit of it takes a lot of effort, and just like, kind of the mentality of just you know might as well find out.
Well, I really hear you saying that you're walking the walk in a sense. You're practicing what you are hoping to create in the world internally in your organization, having that grace, having that acceptance, while still putting the effort and like moving forward on the vision. Would you say that the like your large vision, because you have a really big vision, international, like
Yeah.
it's like what kind of keeps you going, or does anything else support you as you move forward?
um I think part of it is, yeah, like my ambition does help me, but it's also like I'm realistic about it. Um, I know that this is going to take time. I don't think that we're going to be international, in the next year or so. Like it might take 5 years, which that kind of length might be difficult for some people to sustain. So it's like, okay, what can I do to kind of sustain myself as an individual, while I'm working on this thing long term? So I do other things. Like I'm a nerd. I play in TTRPGs. I stream on Twitch. I am working on becoming a voice actor. I want to write books. Like I do all these other things too. And I really enjoy these things because they are sustaining my creativity. They're sustaining my drive to just be present in different places. Like I'm working on obtaining my dreams that got derailed, but in a different way. So like I've always wanted to be like a guest at a convention for something. So like I have this nonprofit now. I may not be a guest, but I can have a table for the nonprofit, right? And that can be a step. And then, but I'm also working as a, wanting to be a voice actor, and I'm wanting to write books, and I'm doing, in the TTRPG, the tabletop role playing space, like playing D&D and stuff, and like actual plays. And so I don't know if that will become anything, but I'm doing that stuff. I'm performing. I'm doing really fun, cool things to kind of help feed the creativity in the brain. Because if I were to just only do the nonprofit, yeah, that would be too much, and I would probably give up on it way too quickly. So I have enough to keep myself busy and interested.
Mm. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. That you're allowing yourself to be involved in multiple things at once, which probably helps the ADHD side. But
Yeah, yeah, and like and that's part of like, well, like I'm doing all these things, and I don't have the energy to do them all the time. So it's you know the main focus. I kind of what I do is like I do an anchor point type deal. Like the anchor point is the nonprofit. Everything kind of comes back to the nonprofit, the AuDHD community. So like my Twitch community for streaming, that's very neurodivergent AuDHD friendly. And so like I have a Discord that people join from that. Like my social media content is talking about ADHD autism. And I bring people to Discord, and like I have all these people funneling into the Discord from the peer support group, from the nonprofit, from a Twitch community, because we're all in different interests, we're all different scopes of things, and like I want to build a Discord community that has like many discords within it, where it's like, okay, like we have the writers, we have the voice actors, we have the programmers, we have all these different people that have different interests all in one community. But then the commonality is our lived experiences being ADHD and autistic or other neurodivergencies. And so you know building that community, that's what I mean. So if I succeed as a voice actor, I'm still going to be a ADHD autistic voice actor, where I'm going to advocate for ADHD autism in the voice acting space, right? Like, so everything comes back to that. If I'm in the TTRPG space, like I'm an ADHD autistic actual play actor, and I'm going to advocate for those people in that space. And so yeah, like that kind of helps me keep going. And like it's really interesting because like I might discover new pathways that I didn't think about doing that.
and I can definitely hear that common thread. That you personally, your identity is always involved in everything you do, but then also that passion for advocacy, no matter where you are at. Which, like you were saying, directly connects with the nonprofit, because that's like very explicitly advocating for ADHD folks. But you can sort of draw it back from every other project as well. And so there's an element, and it's kind of beautiful, right? Because there's an element that's consistent, and then there's an element that gets to engage with variety.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lot of different communities that are overlooked or just not really interacted with in the way that they should be. Because like I've been to like the National ADHD Convention, right? Like it's a convention that's held every year. It's about to be in Anaheim this weekend, and like I've been to that location, and I've been there. Like I hosted a panel last year, and Dueling Minds is hosting a peer support group this year, and it's a great place to connect with professionals, right? Like, but it's not accessible to the public. The cost is just outrageous, which is they're aware of. And I'm hoping that they'll do something about it, which I'm pretty confident that that might be something they'll be able to do something about it. I don't know. I hope. But it's not acceptable accessible to the public, to the people that actually would benefit from a national convention like that. You know, where you have the top scientists and researchers and professionals providing, you know, education and conversation around ADHD. Um, so I am like, I really want to connect with people that either A, have no idea that a national ADHD convention even exists, and even if they did know, wouldn't be able to afford to go.
Mm.
You know, so I want to connect with those communities because uh, they're the ones that are most directly affected by it. Like those are the people that are struggling financially, are kind of stumbling through life a little bit more because, you know, they have to brute force everything. You know, the people that, like, they have to allocate their energy between, well, am I going to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches tonight so I can actually work on, you know, something because I don't have enough energy, or am I not going to work and make a nice meal? You know, like it's people that are struggling that way because, like, I'm a single person right now, and, you know, cleaning, feeding myself, doing all the work that I'm working on, socializing, it takes a lot out of me. And so, like, I have to make judgment calls of, like, okay, like, how long can I go to do the dishes? You know, like, you know, how long's too long? You know, what kind of meals can I prepare for myself? Um, and I just want to help people like that as best I can and support them in that way. Because, like, if I could afford it, I would have someone cook for me. You know.
Yeah, I actually saw on Threads, which is where I connected with you, someone say that one of the things that has helped her ADHD the most is just making more money. So you can
Yeah.
like start outsourcing things. Um, but so I would like to ask a couple things. So one being about the nonprofit as an organization, and then one about like when folks come into your community. So maybe the first one is like, as a nonprofit, you have to find funding in different ways. Maybe you're at the beginning of that journey, I don't know, but like what has helped you thus far with supporting that, or like what are you kind of needing right now?
Yeah. The funding is the tricky part because I think it's not very ADHD autistic friendly.
Yeah.
It's really not. To be honest, I really have not dove deep into, like, the grant side of things yet. Um, and that's something that we need is someone that might be able to help us with that. We've done a few fundraisers. You know, we've made enough money from that to kind of like keep the lights on type deal. And now, like, I'm working on um, outreach and connecting with people and at least getting the awareness of our existence, and hopefully maybe we can get some people that will fundraise for us because a lot of things that we've done so far I've been personally involved in, where, like, I've organized the fundraiser, and I've been participating, and you know, I was a direct, you know, point in it. And I would really love for people to be able to be like, hey, we want to support you and do a fundraiser for us, where I don't have to be involved. Like, I would love to support and be involved as much as I can, but, like, I don't have the time and energy to always plan all the fundraisers and things like that. I still will, and there's some I still want to do, but, like, I want to connect with people, work with them, and, you know, utilize the community, and, you know, see what they can do for us, and, you know, and that kind of stuff. You know, like like, you know, really work with people in ways that can help raise that awareness. But yeah, I would really love to be able to, like, get some grants and maybe some, financial assistance from someone that is really interested in what we're doing, and if they want to participate in the nonprofit and donate, like that's something that'll be great because I would love to be able to like have like paid positions and kind of grow the nonprofit into something to match the ambition that I have.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wonderful in that you sound like you have a lot of clarity on kind of like what will really support the next level of the nonprofit, and that right
Yeah.
now you're doing a lot of it yourself.
Yeah.
um, but and hopefully this conversation, wherever this goes, who's ever listening, maybe they'll be really inspired to support what you're doing because it sounds really, really impactful. I mean, you're already touching like a really large group of people, and so I want to maybe switch to on the other side of like folks who might want to come and be a part of the community, and the things that you're doing. And so, what would you say are some of the main challenges that you support people with, and like what is it like being in one of your communities? Um, I know we've probably mentioned it a little bit. Even just being in a community helps with isolation, obviously. But I would just maybe from your own words love to hear about that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, the main ways that people can interact with the community is either through the peer support group, which that is, I mean, that's 2 hours of we have conversations around different topics related to ADHD and autism. So like I usually pick 2 to 3 topics every week, and we just have those conversations. Um, and so that has been really successful. A lot of people have found a lot of great value out of it. Um, and it's a space for people to um, explore their own vulnerability, um,
Mm.
and you know and learn. The Discord community is a great place to connect with people, make some friends. We do have some support aspects in it as well, of like people can ask for advice, or if they need emotional support, like we have places like that, or if they just want to vent, we have a place for that too. And that's beneficial. But the Discord is also, it's like a social community. Like we if you have interests that you want to share with, if you play video games, if you want to do body doubling, if you need accountability, like those are good ways to utilize the Discord as well, or just talk, to have conversations. The Twitch community is a lot more kind of just me, right? Like it's me as a person, where we hang out, we play video games, we do body doubling, it's a place for people to unmask, if and to they can ask me questions if they want. They can talk directly to me, and that's kind of how I've always wanted it to be. It's like it's not officially a part of Dueling Minds, but because I am the president of Dueling Minds, it's always like everything I do is always going to be connected to it. But like you know, I want to be accessible in some ways where I'm like, I'm just a person, right? Like, and you can come hang out with me, and we can be silly, we can be goofy, and play video games. Um, I will say that like the Discord and Twitch are going to be like 18 plus, because we get kind of mature sometimes, and like that's also part of like living and um, you know, the community that we have.
So a lot of different touch points, a lot of different ways in
Mm-hmm.
which someone can be involved in community. It sounds like that's just a big part of who you are as like community builder. And so it's coming out in all these different ways. Um, and this is kind of like a broad question, and I know you've been talking about it the whole time. This is called neurorevolution. So I
Yeah.
like to ask this too, around like from your perspective and from your vision and everything. Like, what is your vision of like a world that is neuroaffirming? Like, what would you love to see happen in the world in the next how many ever years,
Um,
decades? Like a large scale vision.
I think I would love to see more people practicing radical acceptance, especially in places that um are right now notoriously not accepting. Um, and I I know there are places and people out there that are, intentionally not accepting, but I think a lot of it is just ignorance. And there's that's a whole other conversation of like generational trauma and things like that, which definitely affects our society and how things are run and perpetuated and all of that stuff. Like there's so many different things happening. So, but if I can help change certain work environments, right, to make those work environments better, because one thing about being neuroaffirming is you're neuroaffirming to everyone. You're not just affirming to ADHD and autistic individuals. So accommodations for us can be applied to everyone. It makes the environment better for everyone. You know, and so that's one big thing, and just helping build that self sustainability for people, giving people more opportunities and more options on what they want and can do with their life, um, and just developing a community of people that are supportive of one another. And when I say supportive, like I know not everything's gonna be like you know always happy and always cheery. Like supportive means allowing people the space to make mistakes, right? Like there's gonna be conflict. There's gonna be mistakes. There's going to be resistance. There's a lot of things that will not go right, but I want the community to be able to be open and supportive, and allow people to grow. And like, while yes, I will protect the community, but that's only from people that are not willing to do the work, right? Like if you come into the community and you're disruptive, and we have a conversation with you, and we're like, hey, like this is not cool, and you're like, f you, and don't want to confront that or anything like that, like yeah, you're probably not going to be part of the community anymore. But that's not because we don't want you to grow. It's just like you know it's protecting the community as a whole. But like if you show up and like you make mistakes, you upset someone, you say something that might be insensitive, um but we have a conversation with you and we're like, hey, like what's going on, like let's work through this, and you are actively putting in the work and trying to be better and listening, then yeah, like that's okay. And I think that's what community is for, right? Like it's not just to be like one thing. Like it's not just to curate a bubble of people that agree with you. It's to curate a community that's going to look out for each other, but in ways of like, hey, you're doing something that is not right, and we need to have a conversation, and we need to correct that together as a community. So yeah, so professionally, yes, I would love to do that, but honestly, like I want real community where people can actively grow. But that also means that they have to confront the things that are uncomfortable.
And that's, really, really powerful when you're willing to do that. And I think it connects back to that sense of radical grace as well that you've mentioned. So, like, if people are willing to do the work, then you're willing to show up to the really uncomfortable conversations that can happen
Mm-hmm.
and need to happen, because that's, like you're saying, what community is about, growing
Yeah,
together.
and I mean we've had some of that recently, where like the recent political climate, we've had to have some uncomfortable conversations with people. Um, we because there are things that affect us, and if if you are holding beliefs that are harmful, I'm going to give you the opportunity to learn. I'm going to give you that choice. I'm going to give you that space of like, hey, these are the things, like this is why this is harmful. But like if you just want to plug your ears and not listen, then I can't. Then there's nothing I can do anymore. I can give you the information, and then I can send you on your way. And if you decide that later on, like oh, hey, you know what you're saying was actually right. Like you can come back, but you have to be willing to again go through that uncomfortableness. My dog is barking. Sorry.
Okay.
One sec. But yeah.
Um, okay. Well, I know we're kind of coming towards the end of our conversation. I'm really glad you were able to share like about your mm, your vision and your values for community. I'm very excited for what you're doing. And um, were there any goals or upcoming things that you're really excited about?
Oof. I mean, pretty much everything I've talked about. Like
Yeah.
that's everything I'm working on. Like, um, all of that is what I'm excited about, and upcoming, and I'm hopefully we'll see a lot of that stuff come up next year. You know, and yeah, just continue growing. My
And
dog
then,
agrees.
yeah. And where can people find you? And I'll put links, in the description so people can find that. But
Yeah. I'm pretty much on every social media platform except for Twitter. I'm mostly, I'm mostly on Threads and Twitch. Um, but yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere else, as well. And I'm hoping to be a lot more active on other platforms other than Threads and Twitch. But yeah,
yeah, it takes a lot of time to do all
yeah,
the things. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate this conversation. And maybe you'll be welcome back in some time to hear how things are going.
yeah, of
But
course.
yeah, any final words or anything?
Oh, I mean, I feel like I've talked a lot
I know.
already. Yeah, it's one of those things like yeah, like yeah, I hope to see people in the community, and that they're interested in joining us and contribute to what we're working on. You know, I think that's the big thing.
Wonderful. I hope so too. And I hope that this conversation helps and supports what you're doing. Um, so yeah, so thank you again, and I will see folks back on the podcast next time.
Okay, thank you.